evening. And I'm going to ask the city clerk to take roll, please.
Commissioner Abraham?
Present.
Commissioner Holland?
Present.
Commissioner Rhodes?
Here.
Commissioner Wilson?
Present.
Mayor Harless?
Present and here. Just a reminder to anyone in the audience that wants to make public comment tonight, we do have the forms that you'll need to fill out. I think they're over by the thermostat. And if you fill one of those out and just bring it over to this box for us. We have 2 here already, but if you want to speak tonight, please fill one of those out. And I'm going to get started by asking Commissioner Holland to lead us in the invocation. Please stand with us.
Dear Lord, we ask your blessings on all of us who have been called to lead the community in which we live and work and play. Help us as leaders to not ask first, how do we fix this, but what do we need to learn? How might we need to change, and to whom do we need to listen? Remind us, because we all forget from time to time, especially in the noisiness of the day-to-day, that we are not only leaders but also servants, and that it is our responsibility and everyone's to serve the common good of all. This we pray in the name of all that we hold sacred and holy.
Amen. Thank you. If you'll join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. You may be seated. Who's doing it? Okay. All right. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. All right, we have quite a bit to do today before we get into business. We have starting out with a proclamation about Head Start Awareness Month. Thank you, Christy and team, for being here today. And I will read this proclamation, and I think we're going to do a photo. Is that true? And then do you want to say some words afterwards?
Just a little bit.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's do that. Okay. Whereas Paducah Head Start Preschool has served our community for over 50 years with family services, health services, including dental and vision exams on site, as well as high-quality, developmentally appropriate preschool and early education services. And whereas Paducah Head Start Preschool currently has an enrollment of 270 3- and 4-year-old students that are considered at risk, and whereas several families have been able to go back to school, complete their GED, complete higher education, and obtain employment. And whereas nationwide, Head Start programs serve more than 1 million children, families, and pregnant women each year. And whereas there are 4 major components of Head Start that combine to create a successful program for students and families, those are education, health, parent involvement, and social services. Now, therefore, I, Brandy Harless, Mayor of the City of Paducah, Kentucky, do hereby proclaim October as Head Start Awareness Month in the City of Paducah, and I commend this observance and remind citizens that these students are the future of our city. Yeah. Christy, if you want to come on up to the mic and say a few words.
I just want to thank the staff that came tonight. Paducah Head Start truly does serve our most vulnerable children and families here in the City of Paducah. Paducah Public Schools has been such a blessing to us, and they have given us and support us through the use of the former Cooper Whiteside building, and that's where our Head Start building is located. So if our preschool Head Start staff that are here, if you are a Head Start parent or had a Head Start child, if you will stand up for me. So that's a big piece of our program is Head Start really wants to work with our children and families to not only help and educate the child and the family, but hoping to improve the lives of all the children and families that we serve. So I appreciate your time, and you're welcome to come to our building at any time and volunteer, come read, and we thank you so much for all you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christy.
So I wanted to say, because I stood, obviously, look, I even got this out in anticipation because my youngest child, Felix, spends 8 to 4 with this amazing team Monday through Thursday. He had a stroke when he was a baby, and he has reduced use in one arm, and he goes to Head Start. He gets services at Head Start. He takes occupational therapy and physical therapy and learns, and they take care of him like he is their own. And as a parent served by Head Start, I can't say thank you enough.
Sweet. All right, want to take a picture?
I should have brought him tonight.
Yes,
And then he'd have to leave.
Commissioner, do you want to be in the picture? That would be great if you want to. Sure. So I think we should all go down there. What do you think about that? Okay. Why don't you go down?
Thank you. Thank you for taking care of
Well, there could, but I know I will be. Hopefully, I will be the only one.
All right. Next up, we are going to do something very, very special tonight in honor of the wall that heals that pulled into town this afternoon to Carson Park. It will be here until Friday, and on Thursday, you'll be able to go for a 24-hour period and visit the wall. Really, really touching experience this afternoon. Commissioner Holland and I were there, and I brought a photo of the event up on the screen here so you could see, I don't know how many veterans on motorcycles drove into Carson Park, followed by this truck, and then many, many, many more old cars and more motorcycles, and they drove from Princeton all the way to Carson Park today. So we thanked the law enforcement today. They deserve a huge round of applause. Michael Swinford, I just saw you back there. Hi. Good to see you. Mr. Warden.
220 total vehicles in the caravan.
That's what I was about to say.
220 total vehicles in the caravan.
It took them 15 minutes to get into Carson Park, I would say.
That is very
Just to
true.
pull everybody in.
That is very true. And I know tonight we were, Suzanne Clinton from the organizer from Milner and Orr was supposed to be here, I think, for us. But I think instead we'll do something else. And if you are a veteran, would you come up front? Michael, can you make it up here? And I would like to read this. And I know, Robert, if you don't mind. And I'm going to stay here and read it so that the camera can catch me and see. But if you are a veteran in the audience, and Troy, I would love it if you don't mind. I'll tell you this afternoon, Chief Kyle, thank you so much for what the fire department did today, and what an honor it was to see so many people who give their time and service to our community and our nation. I am going to read this, and then Mr. Warden, do you mind taking it from me? And then we will maybe take a photo with all the commission again. Okay. Whereas millions of Americans demonstrated their commitment to country during the Vietnam conflict, and thousands made the ultimate sacrifice, including 43 from our region, and thousands more were wounded. And whereas those who served in the Vietnam conflict spent the longest period of time in intense combat, and were some of the youngest to have ever served in the United States military. And whereas all veterans of the Vietnam conflict, both living and deceased, POWs and MIAs, should be honored and remembered with respect and reverence. And whereas in Paducah, we recognize and are deeply grateful for the many profound sacrifices made by those who served, the fallen, the missing, the wounded, and the millions who awaited their return. Whereas the wall that heals Vietnam Veterans Memorial Replica and its accompanying education center will be at Carson Park October 25th through 28th. Now, therefore, I declare the week of October 22nd, Vietnam Veterans Honor and Remembrance Week. In Paducah, our community and our nation stand stronger for your service, and we honor your proud legacy with our deepest gratitude. And I just wanted to ask everyone who is a veteran in here just to stand up, because to me, and you are one also, Today was just such an amazing moment for our middle school students to watch this drive by and to remind them of the service that you all have done to this country and that millions of others have done. And it is just a very touching week for us, I think, here in Paducah. And honestly, you know, there's going to be mixed emotions, I think, about this experience. Some today were in tears, some were in celebration. I think we're going to have a lot of experiences. And Andrea Orr said from the podium this afternoon that one of her goals for doing this was to bring our community together. And I am thankful that they led the way to do this. So thank you all. Will you all take a photo with us? Do you mind? You want to come down with us in the commission?
Mayor, just a quick comment. My oldest cousin, Charles Lewis Mays, in 1968, he graduated high school. He was 18 years old. And I believe his draft number was like 3. And I was 8. And he was my hero. There was not an athlete that could do anything that, I mean, he was amazing. He served a tour in Vietnam, and there was 4 guys off of Jones Street in New Bern, Tennessee, in Dyer County, that went to war, went to fight in Vietnam. He was the only one that came back, and he came back, and we were obviously glad to see him, and we did the big cookout and all of that. But he was a little bit different, just a little bit different than what we remembered. And as I've gotten older and did research on the conflict and the guys that came back, now I understand it now. Didn't quite understand it then. I remember getting the letters from him, and it had the red, white, and blue borders around the envelope. And we would always know that he was writing, and the letters initially came pretty regularly, and then they didn't so much. And so I think the wall here, it's kind of an equalizer. I mean, we talk about a lot of different things, and we're on all different sides of issues, but when you see something like that, it kind of brings everything to a point. And you realize that we're all in this together. And if we don't figure it out, it's not going to get figured out. And then these guys made the ultimate sacrifice to go. Some volunteered, some were drafted. But very appreciative of the wall that's here and the fellas that stepped up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, we are going to suspend our order for a moment to move things around. So I have a motion for that. I move that the rules for conducting city commission meetings be suspended insofar as they are in conflict with the printed agenda for this meeting. Otherwise, the rules are to remain in full force and effect.
Second.
Thank you. And roll call, please.
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Holland?
Aye.
Commissioner Rhodes?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Harless?
Aye. And at this time, I will ask Lisa Emmons to come on up, if you don't mind. And this is in relation to item 3B on your agenda.
Yes.
You mind moving the mic? Thank you very much.
The first of this year, the staff in the city engineering department asked me to take a look at a portion of your riverfront property and determine ownership of it. It is a small portion of your riverfront property. It spans from North 6 to the river and between Madison Street and Campbell Street. And majority of it is depicted on this plat, M1260. And this property has had a very complicated history. It was assembled originally assembled prior to 1970 by the city. There were grant funds and industrial revenue bonds available. They were being promoted for the development of a convention center in Kentucky, in municipal areas of Kentucky. And the city and the county came together and by ordinance enacted the Paducah-McCracken County Convention Center Corporation. And they were going to assist the city in constructing, developing, and subsequently operating a convention center and a hotel. So the property was originally owned by the city, but the Convention Center Corp was actually operating it or controlling it at that time. They also were acquiring other remnants of property around there. And at that time, the industrial revenue bonds were granted, and they obtained a contract with Green Construction to build the convention center and what's known as the Executive Inn Hotel. The convention center and the hotel pretty much expands that whole area, which was in 2005 approximately 27 acres. In 2005, the city determined that it did not want to hold any additional ownership, so they turned everything over by deed to the Convention Center Corp. The Convention Center Corp at that point was managing the leases that they had with Green Construction for not only the hotel but also the convention center. After the 2005 conveyance, the corporation continued to acquire other properties in the area. And so the original 27 acres did expand slightly. In 2009, it became necessary for the city, along with the consent of the convention center, to reacquire those leases. The hotel was not being operated as people in the community had hoped it would be operated. They had an inexperienced hoteler in there. So they filed a civil action to acquire all lease rights. The city came in and paid quite a bit of money to acquire all assets under those leases. That included the buildings, which include hotel, all lease rights to the convention center, and all equipment, everything. They put in the money, and they acquired the property from the hotel and the mortgage company. They also paid off all encumbrances because there were several mechanics liens that had been filed against the property. So they paid everything off. They had the city at that point owned all the fixtures, but the land was still owned by the Convention Center Corp. At that point, it was decided that the Convention Center Corp would own the convention center, but all adjoining land would be owned by the city. And at that point, the Convention Center Corp deeded back to the city lease tract number 1, which encompassed a majority of the property. And so at that point, we thought everything was fine. However, subsequent surveys showed some issues because we did keep acquiring additional land. Number one, we annexed the Ohio River and made expansions out into that river via the transient dock. We also acquired some property from Midwest Terminal, which is now Jim Smith Contracting. So we had acquired a little bit more land. Some of it was kept by the city, some was conveyed to the court. So, you know, the intent of the city and the convention center just kind of wasn't really being depicted in the records of the courthouse as to ownership. So we had a survey completed, and the survey identified all the boundaries accurately, and those boundaries are now depicted on this plat, M1260, and it has abolished and superseded all other plats. It's done away with the lease lines, because the lease lines are gone. Those leases no longer exist, they were terminated. And in order to put title to the land adjoining the river, except for the convention center, we have proposing by ordinance that various transfers between the convention center corp and the city be executed, and those are in your ordinance. Track 1 will be owned by the city, and it's the largest piece. It's mostly vacant. It does include the dock and the park area. This track 1 is also subject to the hotel parking lease. So that piece was also adjusted. It's also, the city will own track 3A, which is basically the showroom. And I think you all are maybe looking at development of that track. The track 3A was originally a part of the lease tracks, but it was expanded because of the annexation of the Ohio River and the need for maintenance along the riverfront. So that has been expanded, and that would be conveyed to the city. 3B is a parking lot. Everybody in this area pretty much shares that parking lot. The city will own it, and it'll be used for public parking. Track 4 is vacant land that fronts on the riverfront. That will also be owned by the city. The only thing that the convention center will own is track 2, which is approximately 9 acres, and it encompasses the convention center and expo center. So all of the conveyances were pretty much cleaning up that, establishing ownership, and as well, because it's kind of a domino effect, because we're cleaning up property lines between the parties, we're also required to clean up the leases that are subject to these property lines. That would be the parking lot lease. So we're having to amend the parking lease with a hotel. That kind of snowballs, and we have to adjust the mortgage because there's a mortgage on it. So that's what's led to a modification of the mortgage. Also, since we're in this area, we also established the boundaries per this plat of the actual hotel, the Holiday Inn. And so that lease document has to be cleaned up to properly reflect this plat. There was a legal description in that lease, but it was not ever a platted legal description that's off record. So this just, and the acreage stays exactly the same. So we've talked to the Paducah Riverfront Hotels Court and Mr. Hickton and his attorneys. They are in agreement with the concept. And also it does clean up the parking lot. Their actual occupation was a little bit more than what the lease provided, but not significant. I mean, it just kind of cleans it up. So they're all in agreement. It is just getting signatures at this point. Also, I've spoken to Brian Katz with the Convention Center Court, and he has already executed the deeds from the Convention Center Court back to the city. So they're in agreement. The only other track that we're cleaning up of those is a small piece, and it's primarily dealing with the Campbell Street extension that was implemented, and
You're probably wondering why we're talking about this. And it's twofold. And I'll let Megan talk about the Greenway Trail Phase 4.
Cheryl, do you mind hanging on one second and letting us introduce this and putting it on the floor
Absolutely.
before we go
Sorry.
in?
Go
Thank
ahead.
you. Okay, Commissioner Abraham.
I have it. I move that the Board of Commissioners introduce an ordinance entitled, an ordinance of the City of Paducah, Kentucky, approving corrective transfer of real property and interest in real property among the City of Paducah, the Paducah-McCracken County Convention Center Corporation, Jim Smith Contracting Company, LLC, Paducah Riverfront Hotel, LP, and Independence Bank with respect to the development of the Paducah Riverfront, a public project, and authorizing the execution of various documents to effectuate same. This ordinance is summarized as follows. The City of Paducah and the Paducah-McCracken County Convention Center Corporation together own the Paducah Riverfront property, which real property is generally situated north of the Paducah flood wall between Madison and Campbell Streets, a public project. It is the intention of the city and the Convention Center Corporation for the Convention Center Corporation to own that portion of the Paducah Riverfront property upon which the Convention Center and Expo Center is situated, and the city would own the remainder, which remainder the city leases in part to the Paducah Riverfront Hotel LP. A recent survey of the Paducah Riverfront property uncovered certain mistakes in previous conveyances among the parties. This ordinance approves and authorizes the mayor to execute and deliver various corrective transfers and documents to cure these errors.
Second.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, that's okay.
It's twofold. As we were beginning to get through the design process of Greenway Trail Phase 4, as part of the local public agency review process with the transportation cabinet, we realized we didn't have necessarily control of all the property, or it wasn't clear that we had control of all the property where the Greenway Trail Phase 4 was going to be located. And as we get to looking at it, we had plats that said property was conveyed that didn't have deeds that corresponded with those plats and vice versa. And we were really confused, so that's why we asked Lisa to take a look at it. So the Greenway Trail was going to run, as originally planned, under what was the former showroom lounge. Because of several issues with design, we moved that into, I guess, the front of the convention center along the flood wall. But we didn't have control of where it then picked up at the riverfront. Or weren't sure if we had control, I should say. So that's why we asked Lisa to come in. And then the second part of that, before I move on, you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that we saw whenever we were looking at Greenway Trail Phase 4 running underneath the building is that a previous plat had indicated an easement underneath the showroom, which brought the question to the table of why do we have an easement if we own the showroom?
Right.
Which prompted a full look at the plat. And so really what we're doing on Greenway Trail Phase 4, it has to do with M1261, which is the allocation of property to the city in order to have the right-of-way to run the trail, which is the LPA requirement. So M1261 is what started the conversation. You can see it references a lot of the convention center. So as a result, we just had to correct the picture on M1261 to be consistent with previous documentation.
Are we going to have an agreement with the convention center to be in their parking lot since they obviously now officially have
Sure. We will be staying within the right-of-way of the flood wall.
Oh, okay.
And then that blue rectangle you can see is where it's wrapping from Campbell Street on through to get to that flood wall area. So we actually don't have to have an easement, but the convention center is aware through many of these conversations we've had prepping them for signing of the plats, what we're doing, and they're on board.
And then the second part of all of this is that as part of our riverfront development, we want to redevelop the former showroom lounge. And since it was confusing on whether or not we actually owned it, because as Megan said, why would we have a lease or a lease line under our own property? Why would we lease property from ourselves? And so it came into question on whether or not we did own it. And so to clear up that misconception of who owned it, that was, again, part of the reason why we asked Lisa to come in. So, and of course, there's also the discussion about the parking. Who should have control or own the parking between the convention center and the hotel, and the flood wall that's right next to the hotel? We left that as public parking. Because of access to the various other properties within this area. We wanted to make sure everybody had access, adequate access to the riverfront properties, as well as the convention center, the hotel's parking lot, and so forth. So we've left that area as public space. That is the reason, in a nutshell, why we prompted this discussion.
I think the last thing worth adding, to clarify on the hotel leases, the only thing that we're updating there is the parking lot lease has to be changed to the as-built description. So at the time that lease was signed, it was proposed, and now we have the as-built, so we're just updating and correcting that language to reflect what's there. And then the hotel lease has to change because in its lease was an exhibit to the parking lot, which changed. So that track name changed, and that's the only thing changing in the hotel lease. So it's just cleaning it all up and making it correct.
And all referenced correctly. They were, while changing everything, original lease agreements were no longer going to reference the same information on the plats. We want to make sure everything references each other correctly and all the way down the line. So there's no confusion later for the next generation who looks at this property.
Hopefully not.
We have a binder.
Great.
Explains it all.
Anyone have any questions? Comments? No? Thank you all so much for your work. Appreciate it. Thank you, Lisa, for being here. All right, we're going to go back up top to the presentations. And Mark, are you going to kick us off? Thompson?
Kick us off. Is that a good term? Kicked off?
Mouse.
Look nice. Sorry. Feel free.
Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager, I know y'all got a busy night, so we're going to move on through this. Going to give you a briefing on the process for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and I'm going to first introduce Kenny McDaniel of Bacon Farmer and Workman, who is the project manager, and he will introduce the rest of the crew.
Mayor, Commission, first of all, on behalf of BFW, the ownership and employees, it's wonderful to get the opportunity to work with you again and continue our work here in the City of Paducah. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the team that we have. We appreciate this opportunity. We've compiled this team of BFW, Branstetter Carroll, and Peck Flannery Graham Warren, to hopefully provide the best master plan update that you can get for City of Paducah. That being said, I have with me here Pat Hoagland with Branstetter Carroll, absolute nationwide expert on park master plans, done more than I can even count at this point. Jonathan Perkins with BFW, he will be assisting and with the project on the local side here and the local contact for BFW. Jeff Kenner with Peck Flannery Graham Warren, also local. We're all working together, hoping to build the future with you. So with that, we have a slide later on, but as opposed to swapping back and forth, we'll try to get through this as quick as we can. Pat?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back with you again. We have worked with two master plans in the past with you on several park projects. I've got quite a few slides, so I'll try to go through them quickly. I have a tendency to talk fast, and that might be good in this situation. Get the right buttons here. So the introductions we just did, we'll talk about some of the project issues, the project team, the master plan process as most of this discussion, the schedule, and then any discussion you want to have at that point. Some of the issues that we see is you've completed most of the previous plans, those 2000 and 2007 update, I believe. You need to respond to the changing demographics in the community. A lot has changed since that time. There's a demand for more indoor recreation that we keep hearing about, and those just don't go away. And then you need to envision all aspects of parks and recreation services here in the community. It's not everybody will focus on the physical facilities and the capital improvements, but we're looking at the programming and the operations and the whole aspect of this. Why our team? One, we have robust civic engagement, and we've developed these processes over the years. We use an open house format so that people can come and spend 5 minutes or 2 hours with us when we have these open houses, which makes it more convenient and more fun. We have, you see the pictures there, dollar voting. People vote with dollars in these boxes, and kids can do that as well, and then dot voting on various boards. We have a Mind Mixer site, which is an online engagement site, so people can, throughout the entire process, can engage with us. A lot of stakeholder discussions, to all the people that use your parks and facilities and programs we talk to and get their information. And then, mail and web surveys, and I'll get into those a little bit different later. Extensive experience in park system master plans, strategic plans, trail plans, aquatic planning, recreation centered, and park design. There are tons of Paducah experience between all three of the firms that are on this team. And then our plans get implemented. That's the nice thing about all this public engagement, leads to plans that really get built. And the interesting thing, we finished 4 plans in 2016, and as a result of those 4 plans, between us and what some other firms done, there's like over 20 projects that have gone on. Bowling Green was one where the city commissioners there said, we have no money to do anything, and we've worked on 6 projects since then. So even though they all said they had no money, they found it when they know, because otherwise the only thing that you know are the people that come to the city commission meetings and complain or state their case. Now you'll have, through this processes I'll show you, good statistically valid information from the public and know what they really want. We've done at Branstad or Carroll over 50 plans. Since the last plan, you can see quite a few plans all over Kentucky, Ohio. We now have an office in Dallas and doing a lot of plans down in that area. And we've always had projects in New Jersey for some strange reason. So we get around the country and we do these types of plans, and we've seen pretty much everything. Some of the BFW experience in Paducah, you see quite a few projects there. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on those because but you're familiar with those projects. Then Branstad or Carroll, again, the 2002 and 2007 master plans, the first parts of the Greenway Link, and lately the Pat and Jim Brockenborough Kiwanis Park, been working on that, and phase 2 is getting ready to get started.
To correct you on that, it's Rotary.
Rotary, oh gosh. I'm sorry for all the Rotarians that are here. Oh.
They have a rivalry.
Yeah, I know they do. I know they do. Oh. And actually, 2 of our founders were head of Rotary in both Cincinnati and Lexington. The project team, you've seen most of the people here tonight, but also Charlie Schneider at the bottom there is our engineer that does a lot of our aquatics, and then Tom O'Rourke in the middle. He's the recently retired director in Charleston County, South Carolina. He speaks at a lot of state conferences, and he's really good at the funding side of these types of plans. Keith Rodenhauser is a planner with our department, does a lot of our GIS mapping and other analysis. So those are the key people on the team. It's a 4-phased process, so the first 2 phases go on pretty much at the same time. The first one is that evaluate phase, where we're getting our arms around your Parks and Recreation system. We're understanding it more. We're doing benchmarking to other communities, assessing the facilities, looking at the programs, your budgets, and all that, those information. Then the engagement part of that is going on at the same time. Once that's done, then we get into an envision phase where, working with the steering committee, we develop a series of vision for the future goals and objectives, and then we get into the planning phase. So each stage has to be done before the next one can really move forward. So in that evaluate phase, again, looking at your demographics, the previous plans, your funding, your management, and then also some benchmarking to other communities throughout the region, and looking at trends in Parks and Recreation. A lot of what we're trying to do is identify the gaps and then also the opportunities for new services. The service gaps, you'll see we map all this whole list of types of facilities. We'll map a 10-minute walk to each of those facilities, and then a composite of all those to show where the areas that are best served in the community and the areas that are the least well served. Because the idea is we'd like to get everybody within a 10-minute walk to a park, and that's a national campaign that we espouse to. So that's part of it. The engagement phase, that's the most fun part of this whole process, and we hope that you all would get really involved with that and promote that. But community events, we can piggyback on some of your events and festivals, the stakeholder groups, the public workshops, and then the couple different surveys that we'll be doing, and I'll talk about that. These do a few different things. One, it raises awareness of Parks and Recreation and the master plan. Secondly, it creates buy-in from the community. And third, it identifies the needs. So we really have three things we're trying to do through this entire process. And you can see here pictures of people voting with dollars and putting dots on facilities and stakeholder groups, and a lot of interaction with the public. And that's what I think makes our plan so successful. There's more pictures of public engagement. We try to make those meetings a lot of fun. I mentioned the mind mixer site. Again, that's something that we will put up with a few questions in the beginning of the process, and then update those questions as we go along. So as we get a draft of the plan or the vision for the future, we can put those up there for people to comment on. So that's one fun way to get some engagement. So I mentioned the stakeholder groups. These are a variety of different types of organizations. I'm sure you'll identify more in the process that we can sit down and get an idea of their trends, the number of people involved in their program, and what their needs are, their relationship with the city, and how that can be improved. So we get into the nitty-gritty with these groups to find out how we can improve your services. The statistically valid household survey, which you had already done one when we did the first master plan here in 2002, prior to it, but we'll do that real early in the process. But that will be a random sample of, I believe, 2,000 households in the city. So we hope to get at least 400 back. Looking at things like, what parks and programs they've participated in, their satisfaction levels with those, the needs for new programs and improvements. And one thing about this survey is, since it goes to a random sample, we get some people that don't use your parks and facilities, and we can find out why. Whereas the other survey we're going to do is a web-based or handout survey. It's going to be your soccer coach sent you a link, or the program list that Mark's department has, and we'll send it out. So it's people that are already involved somehow. So that group, it's like 95% of the returns will be from people that use parks and programs. This other one, statistically valid survey, will be about 75%, somewhere in that 75 to 80%. So you're reaching. It's really the only way to reach some of those non-users of your facilities. That'll have some cross tabulations. We can look at the households with children and what their priorities are, households with seniors, and by areas of the community, because everything is geocoded. We know, the map, you see the example of the map there, the little red dots show where the people live generally within the block, not the exact locations. So you can do a lot of analysis with some of those. And just examples of some charts and graphs. In this one, how would you allocate $100 among park improvements, and just not without getting into the details, and several bar charts. We take the two surveys, the mail survey, which is in blue, and the web survey, it's in green, put those together on the same sheet so you can compare the results of both those. This one shows improvements people would like to see at parks, and improving and adding restrooms is always number one every time we do this. And trails is always right there behind it. So that web handout survey is a little shorter version of that. It'll be through SurveyMonkey. The idea there is to get as many people as possible participate in the program. So the more people, the better. And you'll end up with a summary page showing the top 5 improvements, top 5 programs, and then the top actions that you should take as a department. That leads into the envision phase. Again, we take all that information, present that back to the steering committee, typically have a public meeting at that point too, and then we go through some exercises with the steering committee to develop a vision for the future, and then go through some goals and objectives from that. So you end up with that recommended vision. And this is an example of one from Fairfax, Virginia, the types of categories that their goals fit in. So that's just an example there. It's different every community. Then we get into the planning phase, where we actually take that vision for the future and then develop the roadmap. How do you get there over the next 10 years? This is a 10-year horizon on the plan. And then the action plan, again, it doesn't just look at facilities, but looking at where land and new parks should be, where your trails and open space and active and passive parks and athletic fields, your funding, marketing, staffing, programs, all that is part of this process. There'll be a draft report, a final report, and presentations at that point. This is an example of how we do the action plan. We look at the actions for 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 10 years, and then who the responsible party is, what the funding source, and then we also connect it back to your comprehensive plan. There's goals and objectives in there. We'll reference those so that the two documents can assist each other. And there'll probably be 150 or so actions that will be within there. In the end, we come up with a one-page summary that identifies most of the goals and objectives and the strategies in the plan. The process is between 9 to 10 month process. That evaluate phase takes place in the first 3 months. And the engage phase, from 2 to 5. Then the envision phase after that, and then the planning phase. There's several steering committee meetings throughout, and then public meetings in there as well. So we look forward to working with you. Are there any questions on the process?
Just would like to see some more of those yellow stars with the public. 3 seems a little small.
Oh, for the
public meetings.
Public meetings? Well, there's going to be a whole lot of other meetings
And I know
with
there's
smaller
online
groups in
engagement,
between there.
and I get that.
Yeah.
I just, maybe 1 or 2 more.
Okay.
3, 5, 5, maybe 4.
Okay.
I
We
think
can do
you
that.
just have to, you have to give lots of opportunities
Right.
for people to
Right.
be heard, and to different times of day, and different meeting areas, and it just takes, that public education role is so important. It takes a
Right.
lot of,
And it's difficult to get people out to public meetings, and that's why I talked earlier about we can piggyback on some events, and I know we have to look at the schedule of events
Yeah,
you have
that would be
coming up and set up
where
a
people
booth.
already are.
Set up a booth at some of those events where we can get information, and sometimes we'll get hundreds of people talking to us at those. Where at a public meeting you get 30 people, you're pretty happy, typically. So, good point. Any other questions?
All right, I got just a quick one.
Sure.
How do you guard against, so you're having a public meeting, and let's say that you have this meeting that everybody who wants to have a velodrome built in Paducah, that's pretty ridiculous, and so they come into the meeting and they're loud and noisy and talkative, and how do you walk away and saying, well, I guess we should have a velodrome because we had all these people?
Right. Well, that's why we do so many different types of engagement, because you can get a group at a public meeting that will try to dominate. If you went to Muhlenberg County, for example, you'd think at the main public meeting, all we needed was equestrian area and I think more 4-H programs and a few other things. The baseball and soccer groups weren't there. So that's why we do so many the different types of surveys, the stakeholder groups, and the other methods that we have as well.
You have a filter.
We do. And then at that public open house, the way we do that is we have the dollar voting, and it'll be like improve your existing parks, add more programs. It's general categories, and they put their dollars in those, and then a series of pictures for types of features they'd like to see, and they put dots on those. And then we'll have 3 or 4 stations, and one would be for like trails and natural areas, one for facilities and parks, and one for programs and events. And on one side of the piece of paper that people can write on is what's great about them now, and the other side is how could they be improved. So that way people can come in and write down their ideas without dominating the discussion. And then they talk one-on-one with the staff and with the consultants as well. So we've worked with a lot of those groups, and we know how to handle that.
Want to hear it.
Okay.
make sure our chess table people are invited to some of these meetings, Mark.
Are there other people presenting?
No.
Okay, great. Okay, I have a few questions then.
Okay.
I'm looking at this project schedule, and
Sure.
B4 is a parks facilities map. Is that a public document that then gets distributed and disseminated throughout the community?
Could be, yes.
Okay,
A
I
lot-
just kind of want to make a star there, that I think that could be a really great opportunity to kind of almost double dip in this process and provide some kind of marketing tool or whatever
yeah.
it may be to the Parks Department. I know it might be changing after this plan, but I just wanted to kind of plug that in
Right.
your mind.
That's a pretty common that becomes a piece that the city would put on the website.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them don't have very good maps to start with. But that map will show your existing parks. It'll show the schools and their locations, as well as trails. And then if there's any other parks, the county parks, state parks, whatever, that it'll all show up on that map.
Okay. We have 3 questions. My second question is the overlap with the planning department. Because I know we have brainstormed internally pretty roughly other places in the city that could have trail systems. I'm assuming that's part of your process, is figuring out where those opportunities
Right.
lie. Okay.
And we'll work with the
Okay.
planning department, make sure that what we're coming up with is similar to what they're doing, they correspond. We just
Okay.
finished the plan in Lexington, and there was a Greenway and Trails plan going on at the same time. The comprehensive plan was going on at the same time, plus the Parks and Recreation master plan, and there was one other plan. There was surveys out just like crazy, and they were worried about survey fatigue, but we all worked together, and everybody's plan complements the other plans.
Okay.
And everybody wanted trails, so it worked out pretty well.
Great, great, excellent. And then my last thing was something that I talked to Mark Workman about, and I think he talked to Mark Thompson, and I talked to Jim about this, that back in the budget session, when we talked about prioritizing this plan, and we were discussing why we should do it, how we should do it, those kinds of things, I remember it starting and being in context of moving further along down the path of a recreation center. And one that includes aquatics, one that includes, we went to Effingham recently and saw their facility, of course. And so I just wanted to hear, or just put the bug in your ear again, that as much work as we can do towards that end during this process, the better, because waiting 10 months to get to the point where a plan tells us we need a rec center is not acceptable to me,
Right.
because we know our community wants one. We've heard it over and over again. We've had our own statistical surveys telling us this. We've been campaigning for years on this issue. The commissioners who have been up here way longer than me know this. So do you have thoughts, and we can have this conversation offline if we need to, but how can we make sure that we're not waiting for month 10 to start putting
Right.
this thing in action?
We'll know when we get to that, like that end of that 4th month there, when we start into that vision phase, we'll have all the public engagement done, we'll have, the analysis done, the review of other studies that document that need. That'll all be done. So at that point, you'll have a pretty good indication of what the priorities are. And then it's a matter of developing the plan, how you do it. So you will know then sort of what the top elements are going to be.
Okay.
And that one's not, those needs don't go away if you don't fill them.
Right. So, good point. And from our old plan, as you mentioned, a lot has been done. The
Right.
big things, as Mark Thompson said last time, haven't been done, and this is one of those.
Right.
So, do you see the engagement piece of this and the evaluate piece of this maybe not starting from blank slate, what do you want in your community for parks, but also being able to capture the details of what that rec center should look like? So, what programming, what components,
Right.
what kinds of things need to go into that facility, rather than kind of starting from that blank canvas? Is there
Right.
can we think about how to do that in some of
and
these sessions?
That's a good point. We can
Okay.
do that as part of our public meeting when I talked about those other stations. We could have a station just for a rec center. Say, what are the things you'd like to see in a rec center? And maybe some of the dot voting that we do would be types of activities and facilities that would be in a rec center. So we can include that as part of that process, knowing that it's a need.
Yeah, that'd be
Right.
great. I mean, I think at any moment we can do that
Right.
and capture that from the public's perspective, the better off we
Right.
are, and to inform that next phase.
Right, and then in the surveys, we can certainly have some specific questions related to the types of elements you'd like to see in a recreation
Great.
center.
That'd be excellent. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you for working together
Thank
on
you.
this. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Next up, we got more master planning. I'm getting a little anxious on planning. But come on, Eric. We're excited to see you.
It means stormwater.
That's me, that's him.
We know we need a plan for that. That's for sure.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager. We're here tonight to talk about the completion of Phase 1 of the Comprehensive Stormwater Master Plan. And I believe each of you have a executive summary document. So this is not the entire master plan. This is a short 29-page executive summary. Would like to show attention to, I believe it's page 20 of that executive report. We talk about public involvement and process, engaging the public in that. That page 20 shows the number of meetings we've had to date. We've had 20 meetings, involving the public, stormwater advisory committees, technical advisory group. So it has been a key throughout our process here. And moving forward, we have 2 more public meetings. We have stakeholder utility group meetings with phase 2. So just wanted to point that out to you. I heard Commissioner Holland says she likes 5. We've got 6, 6 public meetings. So with that, I would like to introduce, I'm sure you all know Mr. John Lyons with Strand. He's actually, I've asked him if he's looking for real estate in the region because he's here all the time. And we have Stephanie Glossner, and then we have Kenny McDaniel representing BFW. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening. Good seeing you all again. I've been instructed to try to keep this relatively short, so I'll do my best. Again, you have the executive summary in front of you. We request that you take a look at that at your convenience and provide any feedback or comments to us that you may have on it before we then transition to finalizing the full document. So tonight, we're just going to sort of hit the tops of the waves as we wrap up phase 1. We're going to, again, touch on some of the basis of our recommendations, a quick overview of some of the projects. We're going to talk a little bit about ranking and prioritization, and then conclude with just some additional considerations as we move forward. So the project overview, as you recall, it really began with trying to understand the problem, evaluating the existing drainage system, looking at alternatives and the range of costs associated with those alternatives, and then developing recommended plan and priorities. Then you can see in the pictures here some images of some of the meetings that we had with your public, which again kind of ranged in attendance over the duration of the public input process. This is really why I'm here. This is the modeled simulation of the July 7th, 2015 event. It's a little bit difficult to see, but anywhere there is blue, that is flooding. The darker the color, the deeper the flooding. So you can see here that it is relatively widespread flooding that occurred on that large storm event. And as we've gotten into your system and built our hydrologic and hydraulic models, there's no question that flooding is widespread in the city for a variety of storms. It doesn't take a 100-year storm to get structure flooding in this community. So based on that map, we identified 23 what we considered cluster areas or problem areas. There are certainly more areas where flooding occurred in that large event, but there's really 23 what we considered to be problem areas. We worked with our technical advisory group, sorting through those 23 areas. Here they are graphically shown. These are the 23 clusters, and you can see in the table at the bottom right that in just these 23 areas in a 100-year storm, 416 primary structures are flooded. So that doesn't include garages, sheds, outbuildings, et cetera. And citywide, it was over 1,000. So we looked at the number of structures that were flooded, the severity of flooding, the frequency of flooding, and then the technical advisory group helped us take those 23 areas and condense those down to 10 priority areas. And here are the 10 that are shown. And then here they are graphically shown, the areas highlighted in yellow with the 10 priority areas. So for each of those 10 areas, we have developed what we call a project profile sheet, and that's included in the document that you have there. And this sheet is intended for you to just get a sense of the extent of the flooding that occurred in that area, the types of stormwater conveyance and/or storage alternatives that were evaluated. It's a short description of the project area, a summary of the benefits. We also included some notes down at the bottom left that we called additional considerations, just to sort of give you a snapshot of each of these project areas. And again, we welcome your feedback on that. If there's any other elements that you would want included in that project sheet, we welcome your input. These are really for you all to have as a working tool moving forward. Again, you may recall at one point I put up this massive spreadsheet of all the various alternatives that you can look at when you're trying to deal with flooding. And the bottom line is, in your community, what it really boiled down to is there's two major methods for dealing with the type of flooding that you're seeing. And we either have to increase conveyance, move the water through the areas, or we have to store the water. So you provide storage for the water, you allow the system to regain capacity, and then you sort of lead the flow back in. And then there's a combination of those two, storage and conveyance. The issue with storage, I'll go back real quick to this map, and you can see that a lot of these problem areas are centered in what we call the urban area, which is highly densely developed areas. So when you get to looking at your alternatives of conveyance and storage, storage takes space, right? You need land to store water. Now, you can do it both on the surface or underground. If you go underground, your costs are going to go up dramatically. So surface storage is always the most cost-effective means to deal with it. The challenge we have in a lot of your priority areas is there's not a lot of vacant land or green space to put large stormwater detention areas in. Not to say they couldn't be created down the road, but for the purposes of this first planning level analysis, you will see in those project profiles the vast majority of the solutions are focused on conveyance. One of the biggest issues that need to be addressed when you're doing a study like this is understanding level of service. And I believe it was the first meeting we had, and you've probably heard me say this in every meeting, including the public meetings. The goal of this master plan is not to eliminate flooding. We'll never eliminate flooding. There's always going to be a storm bigger than the control that we put in. The goal is to mitigate flooding and manage flooding and make sure that you find that balance of the cost and the benefit achieved from the investment in those stormwater controls. So as we worked with the Stormwater Advisory Committee and we walked through each of the study areas with them, and we said, if you want no structures flooded in this area for a 100-year event, costs are going to be this big. If you want to minimize and manage flooding up to a 50-year, 25-year, 10-year, 2-year event, obviously the smaller the event you look at, the smaller your infrastructure gets, the less expensive those controls are. So when you're looking at a level of service type of discussion, it's always finding that sweet spot between the costs and the benefit achieved. And it's sometimes a difficult conversation to have, right? I mean, in a perfect world, nobody would flood. So we presented our analyses to the Stormwater Advisory Committee, and we asked them, what do you think? What's the right target for the engineers to design controls for? And they settled in on this 25-year level of service in the urbanized area. That's the area that is really served primarily by man-made infrastructure. Okay, now we have two areas in your community that we've broken your problem areas into. One is what we call the creek and surface conveyance system, the natural systems. The other is more of the pipe. So we have sort of the riverine/creek system where we have two problem areas, and the rest are located in what we call the urban area. So the urban area needs a level of service determination, and that's what, through the advisory committee, we looked at a 25-year level of service. So the controls you will see relate to that. This graphic is intended to show you, and I'm not sure, can I use a pointer on this? Or do I have to use the mouse? Can I use the mouse?
I don't think we can see the mouse either.
I'm going to point. This is intended to show you the blue area here is water surface elevation. So during a flood condition, pre-control, you can see the water is right up to the structure. When you get into a level of service discussion, you begin to ask yourself, okay, we don't want the structure flooding, perhaps that's a scenario, but we're okay if the property floods. In a big event, you don't necessarily want that regularly. Or we're okay with 6 inches of water in the road for a short period of time. That's level of control, level of service. So the engineers can size for anything, right, except the cost drives it. So you begin to look at these problem areas and you say, with this infrastructure, I can back the water away from this many structures. I can limit the flooding to property flooding or street flooding. And for every community in every study area, that's a decision that needs to be made. So at this point, at the planning level, in the urban area, we used the 25-year event as our level of service. So our controls were sized to convey that. That doesn't mean every property is removed from flooding. It just tells you your conveyance system is sized to convey that type of runoff. So as we looked at the alternatives, these are the priority areas that were looked at. The top two in green, Cross Creek, Pecan Drive, those are what we call the riverine systems, okay? Those systems drain to the creek, and those have, sort of by industry standard, a higher level of service in our evaluation. The infrastructure in those two locations are sized for a 100-year event. And all the other locations, those are in the area that we call the urbanized area, and that's where we used a 25-year level of service. So this table just gives you a quick summary of, based on the design criteria that we used, how many structures were eliminated from flooding in that storm event, how many structures had reduced flooding. We have a lifetime benefit shown, a project cost shown, and a benefit cost ratio. The higher the benefit cost ratio, the more cost effective the project is. So you see some of these, the California Court, Harrison at 27th, has a BCR of 4.83. Pecan Drive has a BCR of 5, and then all the way down to 1.25 at the branch. So collectively, with these projects, both the open channel areas and the urban areas combined, the plan reduces approximately 245 homes from flooding in the design storm, reduces flooding in about 289 structures, and the total cost estimate at this point for those projects is about $43 million, and the benefit cost ratio is about 1.94. A 1 is when the benefit and the cost are about equal, so pretty good BCR. The next stage is capital project ranking and prioritization. And there's a variety of ways to rank and prioritize your projects. Sometimes it's just cost benefit. Sometimes it's number of impacted structures. There can be some construction phasing considerations. There's ease of implementation. Some of these projects could be complex. Some are relatively straightforward. Project ranking and priority may be impacted by availability of funding and grants. And then overall, as funding becomes available, the city may develop a capital investment plan that has a certain ranking and prioritization. Oftentimes, this process is a bit fluid. You may have a prioritization plan based on an anticipated funding stream, and then all of a sudden a grant pops up that maybe fits something that was, in your mind, lower priority because of funding, but aligns well with a potential outside funding entity, so maybe you move that up and get the funding. So it's sort of a living, breathing document that would constantly have to be reevaluated. Some additional considerations moving forward. We think it's going to be important to collaborate with the county to update and standardize stormwater runoff regulations. You know, it's really one big community. We want to make sure that as development occurs, runoff is managed consistently in both the city and the county, and that the way we manage stormwater moving forward aligns well with what we're trying to do with this master plan, which is mitigate flooding. We don't want to have new development sort of overriding improvements we make in the system as we go forward. So we certainly want to encourage development, but we want to do it in a way that aligns well with our flood mitigation controls. It's going to be important to integrate with the comp plan. Again, making sure that land use and how we develop land in the future, again, aligns with our flood mitigation vision. We want to review development and redevelopment standards. Again, that's something that can support what we're trying to do here. Update floodplain ordinance and policies. Pursue partnerships with JSA. JSA is under a federal mandate to reduce combined sewer overflows. Combined sewer overflows are driven by stormwater. So stormwater management is an important element. And John Hodges and Josh are on the technical advisory group. We continue to try to coordinate that with them and look for win-win opportunities. And maintaining the model for future planning and decision-making. Again, as controls are put in place, as development occurs in your community, as just changes occur in your community, it's going to be important that the tools that we develop and hand over to you, it would probably be in your best interest to make sure you have the capabilities to update that, use those tools to evaluate future developments, use those tools to continue to look at alternatives as you move down the road. So those are just things for you to consider moving forward. As we move from planning to design and construction, basically the planning level evaluations are complete. Final design of these projects will require additional efforts. At this point, we have not gone out and surveyed all the utilities. This is fairly high level planning that looks at how we can either store or convey stormwater runoff. We know the runoff that is occurring in certain locations. We know the properties that are being flooded. But at the end of the day, when you go to implement some of these projects, if you're going to put in a large box conduit for 3,000 feet, there's probably going to be some utility conflicts. There may be some property issues. There may be some environmental issues. All of that would need to be looked at in a little bit more detail as you advance from planning to design. And obviously, things like permitting and approvals and those sort of issues. So that's a quick overview of where we are. Thanks for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. Any questions?
You know I have a question.
Sure.
On the Buckner Lane Bridge replacement, it says the basin retrofit can be completed separately, allowing project phasing. How much of the basin retrofit is of the $600,000 project cost? Do you know that? I mean, I know you have all these memorized off the top of your head.
I could follow up with you on it, but basin retrofitting is typically very, very inexpensive. Now, one of the challenges you have if you look at a basin today, the first thing we need to do is make sure we understand there may be record drawings, but we need to know what was actually built, and sometimes the record drawings don't always align with that. So the one thing you want to make sure of is that you understand the storage capacity there today, and when we talk about retrofitting, it's usually changing the outlet control structure. So we're going to tweak the way that basin manages flows, but we need to make sure that the basin has capacity to hold, for instance, the 100-year event. So I'm sure we put some number in there like $20,000. It'll be relatively small, but it would have been based on the assumption that we didn't have to make the basin any bigger, and a more detailed analysis of that basin may indicate that in addition to tweaking just the outlet control structure, a little more grading may be needed. So at this point, I can virtually guarantee very little money was set aside for the actual retrofit, pending a little bit further evaluation. But usually they're very, very cost effective to retrofit basins.
Because this neighborhood is a top priority. They've experienced a lot of flooding. They feel like they've been neglected and ignored. We had stormwater master plan meetings with them. We had public engagement with them, and we've promised them that they would be a priority. And so I feel like if we have really affordable option to serve that neighborhood, it's really important. And I get that the problem with flow is, I learned this in the sewer. If you expand flow in one area, that affects both sides of the, I mean, it's flowing, it's not standing still. So
Right.
Any kind of retrofitting, I understand, can affect issues in other parts of the system, but.
But when we talk to those folks, they say they never see water in the basin. So
Yeah, that's exactly, I heard that as well.
So that is a location in your community that has the ability to store water that we need to make sure is storing water. So
Yeah.
Will you give me a little bit of a legend on what some of the things mean in these photos of the projects? So like the Noble Park Relief Sewer System, there's the red line, and then the next one there's a green arrow line. Is
that a pipe?
And then also the little brown, like why is it
boy.
shaped in brown? Do you know what these things
I
are
think the
telling
brown is
me?
just the problem area, right?
the boundary
There's blue
is
also.
Hang
So
on.
maybe Eric.
Are you on California Court in Harrison?
No, Noble
I'm on Noble
So-
Park.
Is the red a
California
pipe?
Court.
The red arrows are a pipe, aren't they?
The red is like the proposed project location. So here's Noble Park, that red dashed line. Those show the 3 phases of the relief sewer that would be proposed to alleviate the flooding.
Yes.
The black lines bordering the area, that's how we delineated the 10 priority study locations.
Okay.
And the blue area, the blue shading, like where you see Madison, that shows you the extent of flooding.
That's a lot of pipe.
It is a lot of pipe. That's one of the
Large
expensive
pipe.
projects.
Hence
and
the
it's-
$17 million.
That's right.
Yeah, that's one of our complex areas there.
And then the next California court has the green arrow line. What's the difference between the green and the red?
So the green on this one is to show you the Noble Park that was just on the prior one. That is still a proposed system. And then the red shows you what is being
Okay.
proposed for California to tie into the Noble Park one.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Sorry about that. I will make sure that there is a legend put on these fact sheets. That's a
Okay.
good point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? No? Thank you for being here. Thank you, Eric, for your work.
Appreciate your time.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else in the audience want to talk about planning? Oh, Tamara does, of course.
You don't count.
It's a wide open field today. All right, let's move on to some business. Items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the Board of Commissioners and will be enacted by one motion and one vote. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless the board member so requests. Anyone need to remove anything tonight? No? All right, I'm going to ask the city clerk to read the items recommended for approval, please.
Minutes for the October 9th, 2018 City Commission meeting, receive and file documents, personnel actions, a municipal order authorizing the application for a Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives grant through the Kentucky Local Records Branch for the Police Department to be used for digitizing felony case files. A municipal order authorizing the mayor to execute all documents necessary to apply for a matching grant in the amount of $3,000 from the Kentucky League of Cities Liability Grant Program for the purchase of mulch to be placed around playground equipment. A municipal order authorizing the mayor to execute a grant application and all documents necessary through the Department of Homeland Security, Federal Emergency Management Agency, for an Assistance to Firefighters matching grant in an amount of $270,000 for a heavy rescue truck for the Paducah Fire Department. A municipal order authorizing the application for a 2019 Kentucky Litter Abatement Grant through the Kentucky Division of Waste Management for the Engineering Public Works Department Street Litter Abatement Program. A municipal order authorizing the Planning Department to submit a pre-disaster mitigation grant, matching grant application in the amount of $72,836 through the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Federal Emergency Management Agency for the purchase and installation of 2 generators for the Paducah Fire Department and authorizing the mayor to execute all documents relating to same. A municipal order amending municipal order number 2123 entitled A Municipal Order Accepting Grant Funds through the U.S. Department of Justice for a 2017-2018 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Accountability Grant in the amount of $11,284 for the purchase of a license plate reader system for the Paducah Police Department and authorizing the mayor to execute the grant agreement and all documents related to same. To change the scope of said agreement to purchase 5 handheld radios for the Paducah Police Department. A municipal order accepting grant funds through the U.S. Department of Justice for a 2018-2019 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Accountability Grant in the amount of $11,816 for the purchase of 5 handheld radios for the Paducah Police Department and authorizing the mayor to execute a grant agreement and all documents related to same. A municipal order accepting grant funds through the U.S. Department of Justice for a 2018 U.S. Bulletproof Vest Partnership Grant award in the amount of $6,330 for the purchase of 15 body armor vests for use by the Paducah Police Department. A municipal order authorizing the mayor to execute a contract for services with Midtown Alliance of Neighbors in an amount not to exceed $241,500 for specific services. A municipal order authorizing the mayor to execute a professional services agreement with Civil Design Inc., CDI, in an amount of $26,500 for a structural and geotechnical analysis of the former Executive Inn Showroom Lounge building. A municipal order authorizing the mayor to execute a professional services agreement with Consult Econ, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $34,775 for preparation of a hotel market study of the riverfront and downtown area. A municipal order accepting the donation of real property located at 1737, 1739, 1741, and 1743 Martin Luther King Drive from Stuttle and Associates and Darlene Wallace to the City of Paducah, and in consideration of $1, and authorizing the mayor to execute the consideration certificates in the deeds.
Way to go. I make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Holland?
Aye.
Commissioner Rhodes?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Harless?
Aye. And now that the structural analysis of the showroom and the hotel study have passed, I just want to point out that those two pieces were directly connected to our TIF district preparation. So there is a deadline that we have on ourselves, on Cheryl, no, just kidding, on all of us to make sure the application goes in before the end of the year. And these are very important pieces to know how we're going to actually develop those things. So thank you for your work, Cheryl. Great. Still on track, she says. Okay, next up, Commissioner Abraham.
I move that the Board of Commissioners adopt an ordinance entitled, an ordinance approving the final report of the Paducah Planning Commission on the proposed zone change from R1 low-density residential zone to HBD Highway Business District for property located at 5310 Harris Road, 5201 and 5325 Hinkleville Road, 5450 Old Hinkleville Road, 2705 Oliver Church Road, and other properties as described in ordinance number 2018-7-8540. This ordinance is summarized as follows. Rezone property located at 5310 Harris Road, 5201 and 5325 Hinkleville Road, 5450 Old Hinkleville Road, 2705 Oliver Church Road, and other properties as described in ordinance number 2018-7-8540 from R1 low density residential zone to HBD Highway Business District, and amending the Paducah zoning ordinance to affect such rezoning.
Second.
Any discussion, comment? No? All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Holland?
Aye.
Commissioner Rhodes?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Harless?
Aye. Commissioner Holland.
I move that the Board of Commissioners adopt an ordinance entitled an ordinance extending the boundary of the City of Paducah, Kentucky by finalizing the annexation of certain properties lying adjacent to the corporate limits of the City of Paducah and defining accurately the boundary of said properties to be included within the said corporate limits. This ordinance is summarized as follows. The City of Paducah hereby approves the final annexation of certain tracts of property contiguous to the present city limits located at 5310 Harris Road, 5201 and 5325 Hinkleville Road, 5450 Old Hinkleville Road, 2705 Olivet Church Road, and other properties as described in ordinance number 2018-7-8540 and containing approximately 69.83 acres of land, more or less.
Second.
Any comment, discussion? No? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Holland?
Aye.
Commissioner Rhodes?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Harless?
Aye. Commissioner Rhodes.
I move that the Board of Commissioners adopt an ordinance entitled, an ordinance accepting the base bid of Everard Strang Corporation Incorporated for the Pat and Jim Brockenborough Rotary Health Park spray ground and restroom facility construction, and authorizing the mayor to execute a contract for same. This ordinance is summarized as follows. The City of Paducah hereby authorizes the mayor to execute a contract with Everard Strang Construction Incorporated in the amount of $515,000 for construction of a spray ground and restroom facility at the Pat and Jim Brockenborough Rotary Health Park.
Second.
So excited. And just to remember, this is why this park is named after Pat and Jim Brockenborough, because they donated $500,000 to this project. Absolutely unbelievable. All right, let's call roll.
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Holland?
Aye.
Commissioner Rhodes?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Harless?
Aye. Cue the confetti.
I like that.
That's the next one.
Yeah.
Monitors and then confetti.
Just drop it out.
Look at balloon
got
drop.
back.
That's easier to clean up.
Oh, okay. That's not good for the environment. Commissioner Wilson.
I move that the Board of Commissioners introduce an ordinance entitled, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement with Bacon Farmer and Workman Engineering and Testing, Inc. for professional landscape architectural design, construction documentation, land surveying services, and permitting assistance for the Peck Memorial and Outdoor Learning Areas located within Noble Park, an amount of $36,320, and authorizing the withdrawal of funds up to $250,000 as needed from the Community Foundation of West Kentucky account established by Lane Peck for the Noble Park Peck Addition project. This ordinance is summarized as follows. This ordinance authorizes and approves an agreement between the City of Paducah and Baker and Farmer Workman Engineering and Testing, Inc. for professional services relating to Peck Memorial and Outdoor Learning Areas located within Noble Park in an amount of $36,320. Further, this ordinance authorizes the Finance Director to withdraw funds in an amount up to $250,000 as needed from the Community Foundation of West Kentucky account, which was established by Mr. Lane Peck for the purpose of funding the Noble Park Peck Addition project.
Second.
Great.
Mayor, Commissioners, this is another example of the generosity of this community. Shortly before Mr. Peck passed away, Jonathan Perkins and I met with him to go over a rough design on this area, and he was wholly enthusiastic about it, looking forward to the completion of this project, and of course, unfortunately passed away just a week later. And so he made sure that his family knew, his attorneys knew what his wishes were, and he put that into action with the development of this project with the Community Foundation. And Jonathan has some ideas on how we're going to proceed with engagement as far as this project is concerned as well.
Great. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, so good to see you.
you.
Glad to be here. This project, so this is a great project that turned from a memorial location, the monument out there, relocating that into a full community-involved educational opportunity. So we're just really looking forward to opportunities to add some trails basically from Carroll Road area and along the Peck Addition in the woods. Create some outdoor classroom spaces, and which I've already contacted Paducah Public Schools about their participation in the project. So that's to be defined in the future, but they've expressed interest in this. So I'm happy about that because obviously it affects several of our children, yours and mine specifically, I know. And so that's fantastic. These trails will tie into the existing nature trail that exists back by the Anna Balmer building. So it's more or less an extension of an existing trail, addition of classrooms. The hope is that the programming for these spaces will include education on stormwater management. Obviously, I'm a tree hugger, so education on tree identification, things along those lines. We've obviously instituted recycling in Paducah, which is fantastic. So education on that, litter control, those are just some of the bigger topics that I'm pinpointing. But it's just it's going to be a great opportunity for children in our community to have additional educational spaces outside of a classroom, and also they'll be used for summer camp, I'm sure. So I'm just excited that we get the opportunity to do something like this, and hopefully in the future through other funding, now that Mr. Peck has passed away, hopefully we'll be able to expand on this, because at this point in time, we're not going to do it all. So hopefully in the future we will get to do the rest of it and really take advantage of this piece of earth in the park that is presently not doing a whole lot. So thank you. appreciate that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan,
Do you
for
have
your
any
work.
questions?
I do. I do.
Yeah,
I have some
please.
questions. Well, just two things. One, the outdoor classroom, I absolutely know is a good Eagle Scout project because it was my husband's Eagle Scout project and my brother-in-law's Eagle Scout
Yep.
project. So that would be a good savings. Like once we're ready to build those, like that is like A+ Eagle Scout project. Not to like always be like, let's ask the Eagle Scouts to do it, but they need projects to become Eagle Scouts.
Projects.
And I wonder if Land Between the Lakes, the nature center there, would be a good resource for us, just to meet with them, because this is what they do, and they do it so well. Nature education. I mean, I take my kids out to the nature station regularly, and so just talking with them about what they think works really well and what they think is popular areas of education and what serves them well. I know they work really well with the homeschool community, and so I think that would be a good partnership, and like asking what they need. So, I mean, I think that would be really good conversation to have.
Yeah, and actually, it's been a few months ago now, but kind of went through and compiled a list of really programming elements that could be included into this park space. So a lot of those would be similar to what you're saying at the nature station.
Yeah.
I would
And they're so
venture
good at using those spaces for public events too, not just
right.
like
And you know, and this at this point, and obviously we haven't come up with a real design yet. It's very, very fluid at this point. But when we get to a level that we can really define what's going to happen in a space, what materials will be in a space, furnishings, pavements, whatever, that can really affect how these spaces are used long-term. You know, you're talking about Eagle Scout projects. Yes, these are good Eagle Scout project opportunities, especially in areas where, say, we use logs for seating. Free play is also another huge component that we don't use enough in schools. So basically letting kids play with dirt, rocks, stuff like that, stuff that we have removed
from the play environment.
So, you know, bugs.
I really want one of those danger playgrounds that they have in Europe. I'm just going to put that out there where they have like sharp objects and stuff.
And so I've drawn inspiration too from Bernheim Arboretum or Bernheim Forest in Bullitt County, you know, south of Louisville. They actually do exercise. They have a person who specifically works with free play.
Yeah.
So some of those components that he's using at Bernheim, which is you do have to pay for that facility, but you know, some of those components, the nature station, all these little elements, I think will be fantastic if we can include them. And some of them are cheap.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to
Plays free.
put a tree in and pile of dirt, whatever. So, what's that? If you have any more questions?
Any more questions?
Sanders giving me a face for my sharp objects playground.
It's a thing. Look it up.
Yes, voice. I didn't have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. Thanks, Mark.
Appreciate it.
So, Mr. Hoagland, you can see that the point about how we are action-oriented in our community, you already know this. You already know this. We have two huge examples tonight. So, all right, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's like a park theme tonight, but I do want to share with the commission and the public that the Rotary Fitness Park will be opening this week, hopefully this Thursday or Friday. So this weekend, the fitness activities begin. So if you get a chance, make sure you go out there and see that. And then we also have a lot of things going on internally. Kind of want to bring the commission up to speed on. We have the employee sponsorship program that's off and running. It started a few weeks ago, but it's really kind of hitting its stride now. I think after next week, we'll have 7 people involved in that program. That's when we have long-term employees that are helping the new team members assimilate into the organization. We have the planning department. The next 3 days, they're going to be busy going through their records and file system to make sure that they get up to speed in order to better meet the needs of the residents or local businesses when they come to meet with them. They'll be able to find the information for them much more quickly and make their process a little bit more efficient. Make it more, as we said in the office today, more business friendly. The TIPS 411 is now up and running. We did have a final test actually tonight. I just received the text message that said it worked, and that's of course the system we're going to use to for the public notification for any escapes that we have in the community. So that is now up and running. So now we have to make a full court effort to get information out to the residents so they can get signed up for that. And then also we have an internal working committee that's going to be working on the improvement of the workflow process for the inspections and permitting, which occurs here in the city. Lindsay P. is actually going to chair that team for us. She's going to work with Chief Kyle and our new business solutions analyst, or business systems analyst. I always say that wrong, Emma, when she comes on board this Thursday. Also, the departments will be working on some budget issues related to the pension issue. We're breaking those up. Going to be kind of tasking the departments to look internally on in their departments at their budgets over the next several weeks to bring something back to the manager's office in December. The finance department has been busy working on the property tax buildings, and I'm happy to say they got that issue resolved today. So basically, we were kind of behind the 8 ball. We had an issue with the PVA making a statewide software change that didn't format correctly with our system. So we were having some issues with getting it to format right, and it took us several weeks to get that done. So we do have the situation resolved as of today. So they're going through making sure everything lines up before the bills go out. So good news on that front. And then also, Tamara and myself been working with HAP on the movement of Section 8 from city to the Housing Authority. We're hoping to be able to bring back an agreement to this body, hopefully that first meeting in November. So we're making progress there. And then also to share with the commission that Michelle and myself will be working hand in hand with the PED for business retention visits. Those actually begin next week, and those will be ongoing from here on out. That's part of our strategic plan, of course. And then also, as a requirement from this body, Michelle, myself, and Pam will be working on the organizational values and the mission statement, and we'll begin that work next, I think, Wednesday. We're off and running.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Commissioners, comments tonight? Anyone?
I have a small thing.
Okay.
My husband likes to walk from his work on Broadway. He often walks to the transient boat dock. And he sent a picture of Texas, Wisconsin, Virginia, and California and brought some information I thought we all might be interested in. So I don't know if everybody noticed, but it sort of emptied out in June or July. We didn't have a lot of boaters coming to the transient boat dock in June and July. And apparently that is because their insurance companies will not cover them below a certain latitude before certain dates because of hurricanes.
Oh.
So that's what I learned today. I
Are
thought,
we the-
see,
are we the
that's
threshold?
fascinating,
Are
right?
we the cutoff?
I don't know.
I'd like to.
That's just, he
Are
likes
we
to
the
go
cutoff?
down there and he chats it up with the loopers, and I thought I would share that information. Is it true? Mark knew. So that helped me, because I do remember being like, where are they at a certain point? And then they're back in force. It's all full down there. So
interesting.
I thought that was interesting.
Huh. All right. Okay, we do have 2 public comments tonight. Miss Patty Jones is here to speak. Would you like to come up, Patty? And then, Michael, you're next if you want to make your way up here, sir.
Please bear with me. This has been a long project, so I would like to have some time to speak. And you know who I am. I just won't
Would
go
you pull
away.
the microphone?
Yeah, I was going to
Sure.
say, pick the microphone.
Thank you.
This is a timeline. January of 2013, there was first evidence of flooding on Sandpiper Circle over the streets and over the drains. In June of 2013, there was a first flooding event with property damage to our garage, which we consider part of our home, since we do pay taxes on that. And it houses cars and tools and stuff. We were sufficiently worried enough at that time to purchase flood insurance, even though we live in a non-flood zone. We then voiced concern to the developer of the subdivision. We were told that there was not a flooding problem, and the developer's email referenced that the Paducah city engineer agreed with that, and that any flooding that occurred was due to the property located in the county behind the subdivision, that's where it originated. This despite the fact that the flooding came from the street in front of our house, not behind the house. In the summer of 2015, we had a second occurrence of flooding with property damage to our garage. That included us not only paying for flood insurance, but high deductible. In August of 2015, we met with city officials, specifically Sandra Wilson, then City Manager Jeff Peterson, and City Engineer Rick Murphy in the backyard of the Johnny Sam's home to address this issue. In the spring of 2016, the city hired an independent consultant, Dr. Scott Yost, to review a host of documents that included pictures, videos, subdivision design plans, and he was going to assess this flooding issue. In June of 2016, my husband and I met with Clay Robinson, who was the original surveyor of the Olivet Village subdivision, and also with Bruce Byer, who was employed and is employed by the developer. They presented to us a plan that was devised by the developer to fix the flooding problem. This plan, as I understand, was not submitted to the city at all. It was something that they came up with on their own. We agreed at that time to let the developer on our property to do the work that was deemed necessary to, if not correct, alleviate the problem. In September of 2016, the report of the findings by Dr. Scott Yost were submitted to the city. I have a copy of that report in this stack of papers. And after the work was completed, I did observe heavy rainfall that clearly showed that even though work had been done, the streets still flooded a little bit and came seriously close to covering the drains, which stormwater runoff, and I could see that it was, if it kept raining, it was going to flood. In March of 2017, we requested the findings of the Yost report. In August, well, it was August the 30th of 2017, we received an email from then City Manager Jeff Peterson regarding 3 options for correcting the drainage. In March of 2018, March 23rd, 2018 specifically, there was a judgment signed by the Honorable Anthony Kitchen, which rendered in favor of the plaintiff of the property behind us, Dr. Clayton Potter, who sued the city and Rick Murphy regarding the issue, that it did not meet, there was flooding. It didn't meet city ordinance. I have a copy of that judgment also in my papers. In April of 2018, plans were approved by the city engineer to correct the issues that were stated in the lawsuit. In May of 2018, we signed agreements giving permission for easement onto our property for the work to be done. And this work started in June. In June that same year, this year, there was a powwow between Rick Murphy, Dr. Potter, the plaintiff, and Bruce Byer attending. This took place behind my house, and it was an effort to gain agreement from Dr. Potter to let the developer get on his property to do the work that would allow the retention basin to drain. And after that meeting, Dr. Potter drove by our house. I was standing outside with my husband and Bruce Byer, and Dr. Potter hollered through the car window at me and my husband and Bruce Byer, saying that everything had been worked out and that everybody was going to benefit. To date, no work has been done on the plaintiff's property. Work stopped at the end of June, and the basin still does not drain. In September, Rick Murphy and Eric Hickman came to the work site to look over it. My husband pointed out the basin and mentioned, since it's got water in it, that mosquitoes had been very bad this year and were known to be carriers not only of West Nile but Zika, and that it would be a shame if somebody were to get sick. And Mr. Murphy's response was to the effect that it would be hard to prove where that mosquito came from. He also told my husband, I'm out of this. This problem is between the developer and the county property owner, and there wasn't anything he could do about it. So I pose to you the following questions. Is the work completed on this project? Here are some pictures. Duplicate copies. Same thing. You can pass them around. She can get both of them. And I'll put them at the end or keep them on her. Is the work completed on the project as defined on the plans submitted by Shawnee Engineering and signed by Rick Murphy? Has the city engineer signed off on this project's completion? If so, why does the retention basin have standing water, a foot in some areas? And why is there still debris left from the work that was done? Why did employees of Shawnee Engineering place a stake on the county property behind us after the work started on the drainage problem? That stake notes the point to which his property has to be cleared in order for the basin to drain. And it has been evident to us and others for quite some time, years, that the basin doesn't drain. At what point did Mr. Murphy learn that the basin didn't drain? They had to pump water out of it at some point, and there's a picture of the water pump. It's my understanding that before we were even approached to get permission on our property, that they tried to get Dr. Potter to let all of this work, as much could be done from his side on the county, so as not to cause further damage to the yards. But they couldn't get his permission. I have to add that the original drainage pipe of the project, the original pipe that went in, that fed the retention basin, was not entirely placed in an area designated for public utilities, but in part was placed on private property, and that's why we had to give permission. And that pipe had to be left in the ground and pumped full of concrete. It could not be removed because it was close to the house. And I have to ask, how can a drainage pipe be placed on private property and pass inspection? Who passes inspection on issues like that? Was an inspection done? Why, when there is documentation that the city engineer approves plans that don't work, in this case one that the Yost report showed that the subdivision drainage did not meet city ordinance, does he and his job performance continue to get city approval? Does a retention basin that doesn't drain meet city ordinance? And if it doesn't, why isn't that Rick Murphy's problem? He approved the plans for the work to be done this past June. There's been a long history, according to my timeline, of people with humongous egos and oversized bladders engaging in peeing contests.
Ms. Jones, I'm going to stop you there. Really appreciate you coming. And I know a couple things. I know that, and I just wrote down several of your questions that, Ms. Jones, when we have public comment, we ask that we respect you and you also respect this body, so I appreciate that. I understand that. I understand. I appreciate that. So I understand that there is a neighborhood meeting on Thursday. Okay, then I won't speak unless you want me to, ma'am.
I'm not invited to that meeting, and I don't care. You've met, you've talked, since 2015 this has gone on.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, there is work being done to solve this problem, and I'm hoping next time we see you, then it will be solved. Mr. Swinford.
I'll be brief. Y'all look like you're tired and want to go home, so I'll make it real quick. In March 1969, in the Republic of Vietnam, 23 men were killed that night. 23 names are on the wall that heals. Some people call it the wall that heals. Some people call it the scab, but you scrape off, let it bleed, and it heals back up. And I like to think of it as a wall that has a two-way mirror to your soul, because you visit, you talk, you get back together again. I know it doesn't make sense, but that's what happened. So whatever part the city had to play in bringing it here, I appreciate it, because I can visit 23 friends. The other side of the coin is we killed 96 the next day, which doesn't make it right either. But that's the facts of life. So I just want to thank you for that. And we've had a contentious relationship, but I hope that's behind us now. And I'd like to offer an apology to Mr. Mark Thompson. He knows why, I know why. And I wish things had gone a different way, but they didn't. But we go forward from here. We can't look back. And good luck to all of you in the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you
for
so
being here.
much.
And thank you for your service, sir. All right. With that, I'm going to make a motion. Oh, you would like to make a comment?
No.
Okay. I'm going to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Have a good trip.